Acting President. The Liberal Democrats will be opposing this bill today. Sometimes making a decision on what our position should be is difficult, and we are torn. But this bill is not one of those occasions. This is a simple issue of freedom of speech, and the libertarian position is very clear. Freedom of speech does not exist to protect the voice of those that we agree with. It does not exist so that we have the right to hear things that we like. If rights do not protect everybody, even the ugliest amongst us, in the end they protect nobody. They are not rights. The Liberal Democrats are the natural enemies of Nazis. We hate coercion and racism, and we believe in equality before the law. This is the basic philosophy behind libertarianism, and it should be what your mother taught you as well. The Nazis were evil. They were evil because they killed millions of people. Evil for their race-based ideology. Evil for believing that individuals had no value except to serve the state and could be sacrificed freely to achieve the state's ends. They were evil for what they did and for how they thought. Evil because they did not think twice about using the power of the state to remove the agency of individuals. They suspended democracy and removed alternative voices from Parliament. They enabled their worst successes by using emergency powers. They divided people by race and religion. We shudder to think how Nazis would behave in the modern day. I imagine they'd have no respect for privacy, they'd have no problem allowing police to take your DNA or record your medical details without your consent. They would perform surveillance on people through social media and by using drones. They would allow police and others the power to break into our homes. They'd ignore the right to peaceful protest and allow police to use weapons against them. They would expel alternative voices from the Parliament. Nazis would care very little about freedom of religion, freedom of movement, or any other human rights. They would allow police to arrest people gathered at churches and synagogues. They would keep their reasoning for any decisions they made secret because they knew these reasons would not stand up to scrutiny. And they probably have some kind of bureaucracy to rubber stamp the human rights abuses. A hallmark of authoritarian governments is that they like to control free speech. In North Korea, for example, people have been executed for distributing South Korean pop music. Authoritarians cannot bear to hear alternative voices. They wrongly believe that by controlling what you read or see, they can control your thoughts. The Nazis were no different. We remember them for burning books and setting up numerous state bureaucracies to control all forms of expression. If somebody wrote or said something they disagreed with, the police would smash their doors down, enter their homes and arrest them. The Nazis never did care much for human rights. In fact, human rights in the current form did not exist until the UN Declaration of Human Rights was established. An interesting fact is that the person who oversaw this process was a Labor man, Doc Evatt, President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, back in the day when Australia's major parties cared about human rights. These days, the major parties only apply human rights when it suits their quest for power. For a very small group of people, adopting extremist ideology is just a way to get attention. This bill is their dream come true. At last, these nobodies can become victims, a status that they crave. Somebody will pay attention to them. It's hard to say how many actual Nazis there are in Australia, but for the handful of these people, currently living in the basements of their mothers' houses, the passing of this legislation must be one of their best days since the 1940s. It means they are suddenly getting attention. It means they have a chance to feel important. No doubt the dark web is abuzz with debate about adopting new symbols, the Buddhist symbol or any other symbols. And for some reason, the government has generously granted them 6 months to think about their rebranding exercise. For the truly committed neo-Nazi, it means that if they want to, they have a chance to get media attention, to raise money and get followers, or even to become political prisoners. And let us note that in Australia, unlike the US, we do not currently have much of a white supremacist problem in our prisons. If we arrest and imprison these people, we risk creating a prison culture of white supremacist gangs. Turning our prisons into white supremacist recruiting grounds will make things much worse than they are now. It is no coincidence there is no law against swastikas in all the freest and happiest countries in the world. It's especially worth noting that even in Israel, there is no law against displaying the swastika. Israelis take the view that if idiots want to identify themselves, then so be it. Extremists in Israel and free countries around the world are moderated by public opinion. That is how free speech works. Let me emphasise that point. I would prefer that these idiots that purport to support these evil ideologies publicly labelled themselves in this way. They are having a giant label stuck upon themselves, telling the rest of us to exercise our freedom of association and thrust them away. We don't need the government to tell us the Nazis are bad. We know ourselves, and we are free to exclude them. The Victorian government is getting itself into a battle of wits with dribbling idiots. Sadly, this is a battle it looks certain to lose. And this bill is the thin edge of the wedge. It's not just one evil symbol we propose to ban today. We create the template for banning all symbols that offend whoever rules over us. The door will be wide open to ban the symbols of the other kinds of socialists. I imagine the hammer and sickle could be banned by a future government. Communism is an authoritarian ideology every bit as evil as Nazism and has a body count far in excess of it. Perhaps the flag of China, flying as it does atop a mountain of human skulls. One day we might have a government that's willing to call out China for their murder of opposition voices and their ongoing genocides. And why wouldn't a future government decide to ban images of the notorious racist and homophobe Che Guevara? There will inevitably be unintended consequences for protesters or others who use Nazi symbols to express their disgust towards a politician. If a Conservative government should ever be re-elected, what will happen next? Will left-leaning protesters be arrested for suggesting a Liberal leader is a Nazi? In Russia today, protesters are doubling and crossing the Z symbol that's come to represent the Russian invasion of the Ukraine to create a swastika. Should this be banned in Victoria? God forbid we insult Putin or his murderous bloody destruction of the Ukrainian state. The Liberal Democrats believe free speech is fundamental to a democratic society, and governments should stay out of it. Allowing people into people's houses to combat Nazis is like deporting people to the Gulag to stop communism. We do not need to ban swastikas to make it illegal to spray swastika graffiti. It's already illegal to do graffiti. And apart from anything else, the Victorian government should be ashamed to be doing this now, while the emergency pandemic powers are still in place and human rights are still suspended in the state. Piling up symbols that you do not like and burning them in the public square is not the way to fight authoritarianism. If the swastika is the ultimate symbol of badness, banning it becomes the ultimate virtue signal. But like many other virtue signals, you do not make the world better, you make it worse. The Liberal Democrats oppose this bill because if you don't stand for speech you disagree with, you don't stand for free speech at all. We believe that the best way to show your contempt for the Nazis is, first and foremost, not to emulate them. The best way to oppose authoritarianism is to defend basic human rights like freedom of speech. This bill does nothing to fight any actual Nazi movements in Australia, such as they are. This bill is human rights astroturfing. It's an assault on free speech. The Liberal Democrats oppose this bill.